Here is your complete, faithful English translation, preserving every detail, tone, pacing, and the calm, introspective spirit, inspired by Carl Jung. Welcome to Stories for Sleep, a place where stories are not only meant to be heard, but to help you slowly soften and drift into a quieter space within yourself. Tonight, we begin a very special journey, not down into the ocean, but farther still, beyond the stars, to reach the strangest galaxies in the universe. Perhaps you are lying there, your body already tired, but your mind still moving. Small thoughts, quietly appearing, like distant lights that refuse to fade. And instead of trying to stop them, we will do something different. We will expand the mind until those thoughts become very small. Carl Gustav Jung once suggested that when you look outward, you are dreaming, but when you look inward, you begin to awaken. And sometimes, the easiest way to go inward is to travel very far outward. If you find that journeys like this help you feel lighter, you can subscribe to Stories for Sleep, so that each night there is always a story waiting for you. And now, let your body soften. We begin. There are nights when everything grows quiet, but your mind refuses to rest. Thoughts arise gently, one after another, like stars continuously lighting up in a sky with no end. You try to let go, but the more you try, the clearer everything seems to become. Perhaps what we need is not to force ourselves to sleep, but to find a space wide enough, deep enough, for the mind to gently drift. And tonight, we will not fall asleep by leaving this world, but by expanding it. Imagine you are drifting away from Earth, very slowly, very lightly, moving past the stars and entering strange galaxies, vast structures of the universe, where familiar laws no longer hold their usual shape. There are galaxies distorted, stretched by invisible gravity, galaxies that collide, merge, forming shapes never repeated, and galaxies that remain alone, drifting in space, like dreams with no witness. But this journey is not only about the outer universe. Carl Gustav Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Perhaps, as we look at distant galaxies, we are also looking into ourselves, into parts not yet understood, emotions not yet named, regions of inner space we rarely touch. This video will not try to fill you with information, nor ask you to remember anything. Instead, it is a slow journey, where each truth about the universe opens a new perspective, not only about galaxies, but about your own mind. You do not need to understand everything. Just listen and let yourself drift. And as those distant images fade, as your thoughts slow with the rhythm, you may begin to notice that sleep is not something you have to search for. It will come when you stop trying to hold on to anything, entering the strange universe. As your body softens and your breath becomes slightly slower, you may begin to feel a very subtle shift, not in physical space, but in the way you are seeing the world. Tonight, we are not just talking about the universe. We are stepping into a doorway, one that leads to strange galaxies, where familiar rules no longer remain the same. You may have imagined the universe as something orderly: planets, orbiting stars, spiral galaxies drifting gently, everything following a structure that can be understood. But as we go deeper, farther, those images begin to change. There are galaxies so bright they are almost impossible to explain. Their light is not merely reflection, but something like a prolonged explosion, as if they are trying to exceed their own limits. And there are galaxies so ancient they existed close to the beginning of the universe, like the first memories, remaining in a space without memory as we know it. And there are galaxies, distorted, twisted, as if shaped by forces we cannot yet fully perceive. They are not beautiful in familiar ways, but they hold a different kind of beauty, the beauty of imperfection, of transformation, of not fitting into a mold. And as you listen, perhaps something in you feels familiar. Jung once said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order." Perhaps those strange galaxies are not only out there, but within you. Because if you look deeply, you may see that the human mind is not always orderly, not always logical, and not always easy to understand. There are thoughts that appear from nowhere, emotions that come and go without clear rules, parts of you that do not match the image you hold of yourself. But that does not mean anything is wrong. Perhaps, like the universe, you were never meant to be simple. And as you allow yourself to drift with this journey, without trying to understand everything, without analyzing every detail, something gentle begins to happen. You begin to feel that strangeness is not something to be fixed, but something natural. And slowly, you soften, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer trying to control everything, like drifting among strange galaxies, not needing to know where you are, not needing to know what comes next, simply being in the journey. And perhaps in that moment, when you are no longer trying to understand the universe or yourself, you become closer to both, very light, very deep, and very still, light born from darkness. As you continue drifting, very gently, within this space of strange galaxies, you begin to approach another phenomenon, something both dark and radiant, difficult to understand, yet deeply beautiful. At the center of many galaxies, there exists what we call a black hole, a region of space where gravity is so strong that nothing can escape, not even light. A place completely dark, completely silent, as if it does not exist in any way we can perceive. And yet, something remarkable happens. Around that absolute darkness appears one of the brightest sources in the entire universe, not from the black hole itself, but from what is drawn into it. Matter, as it approaches, does not fall in immediately. It spins faster and faster, forming an accretion disk, a vast spiral of gas and dust, compressed, heated, and glowing. This light can outshine billions of stars. These objects are called quasars, brilliant galactic centers visible across unimaginable distances, through billions of light years. A vast light, born from complete darkness. And as you observe this, something deep begins to touch you. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Light does not arise by avoiding darkness, but by moving through it. Perhaps, in your life, you have thought that your dark parts should be avoided. Heavy emotions, unclear thoughts, difficult memories. But if you look at the universe, you may begin to see that those very dark regions are where intensity is born. Not because darkness itself shines, but because of what happens around it. Like matter drawn into a black hole, your experiences, your emotions, do not disappear. They gather, they move, and sometimes they create their own kind of light, not always visible, but present. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. There is no awareness without passing through some darkness." And perhaps what makes darkness frightening is not that it is dangerous, but that we have not stayed with it long enough to see what may emerge from it. But here, you do not need to be afraid. You do not need to confront it. You do not need to solve it. You only need to remain near it, like observing a quasar from a distance, not pulled in, not pressured, just seeing. And slowly, darkness is no longer frightening. It becomes part of the whole, a part with purpose. And you are the same. The parts of you you once thought were too dark may be where your greatest energy lies, not to destroy, but to transform. And perhaps this is the deepest message here, that the darkest place is not the end, but the beginning of another kind of light. A light born not from perfection, but from acceptance. And as you drift, you may feel that light and darkness exist together within you, naturally, gently. And from that space, another journey begins to unfold. Here is your complete English translation, preserving the full meaning, rhythm, and the calm, introspective tone. Galaxies never age the right way. As you continue, drifting very gently through galaxies that carry the shapes of memory, where every curve, every distortion tells a story that once unfolded, you begin to realize that this journey does not end with the past. Because in the universe, the past is not an end point. It is only part of a larger flow, where everything continues to change in ways that are not always predictable. There is a familiar belief in how humans see the world, that everything follows a clear path. To be born, to grow, to age, and then to end. A linear process, orderly, understandable. But when you look at galaxies, that belief begins to fade. There are galaxies that after billions of years of existence, seeming old, seemingly exhausted, suddenly revive. New clouds of gas appear, regions of matter are restructured, and then new stars are born. Not just once, but perhaps many times. There are galaxies that do not grow only from within, but also receive matter from outside, from other galaxies, from drifting streams of gas, from slow interactions lasting millions of years. They do not follow a single path. They change direction, and there are galaxies that are never truly stable. They do not move toward a final state, but continuously adjust, continuously transform, as if they were never meant to become something fixed. No clear ending, no correct state. Carl Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." Renewal does not follow a plan. It emerges when the inner conditions are ready, and as you remain in this space, observing galaxies that do not age as expected, something deep begins to touch you, because perhaps you too have believed that your life should follow a certain script, that there is a right way to grow, a logical sequence to mature, a proper time to change. But if you look at the universe, you begin to see there is no such script. There are phases in your life that may seem like stagnation, nothing new, no clear progress, as if everything has stopped. But perhaps it is simply a pause, and then something shifts, not because you forced it, not because you did it right, but because the time has come. Like a galaxy suddenly forming new stars, you too can begin again, in a way you could not have predicted, not returning to the beginning, but continuing in a new direction. Jung once said, "Life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research." Life is not a straight line. It is a series of openings, and that means you do not need to be on schedule. You do not need to achieve everything on a fixed timeline. You do not need to compare your journey to anyone else, because you are not a formula. You are a process that can change, that can return, that can open at unexpected moments, like galaxies that never age the right way. you do not need to live in only one way. And perhaps what creates pressure is not that you are going the wrong way, but that you believed there was only one right path. But the universe does not think that way. It allows repetition. It allows change. It allows new beginnings to appear anywhere. And as you allow yourself to see in this way, something very gentle begins to happen. You no longer need to move faster. You no longer need to be more correct. You no longer need to be like anyone else. You can simply be within your own journey. A journey, non-linear, imperfect, but real. And perhaps this is the deepest message here, that the universe does not follow a simple script, and you do not have to either. You can change. You can begin again. You can open when you least expect it. And as you continue to drift, without needing to know where you are in your journey, without needing to define your stage, you may feel that everything is unfolding in its own way, very slow, very deep, and very natural. And from that space, another movement begins to appear, where galaxies not only change within, but begin to interact, to collide, to merge, creating entirely new forms, as if the universe is learning to recreate itself in a way that is very gentle and infinite. Slow collisions, as you continue drifting, very slowly, through the non-linear movements of galaxies, where there is no clear beginning and no fixed ending, you begin to sense something even deeper, another kind of movement. Not just change within, but encounter. But not the kind of encounters we usually imagine. Not loud, not sudden, not violent impacts as the human mind might expect, but collisions, very slow. In the universe, when two galaxies move toward each other, what happens is not stars crashing together, not instant explosions, but a process lasting millions, even billions of years. Two immense structures begin to feel each other's gravity from afar, and slowly they are drawn closer, not because they want to, but because they cannot not be affected. Gravity is never hurried, but it never stops. As galaxies approach, their shapes begin to change. Spiral arms stretch, streams of gas elongate, like delicate strands of light pulled through space. Gas compresses, forming new star regions. Light bursts forth, not from direct collision, but from invisible pressure, restructuring everything from within. A kind of violence, without sound, a transformation, without a single defining moment. A beautiful example is the Antennae Galaxies 2, galaxies in the process of merging, with long streams of matter reaching outward like antennae. No instant destruction, only prolonged transformation. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Deep change rarely happens gently." And as you listen, you may begin to realize these slow collisions do not exist only in the universe. They also exist in your life. There are encounters that do not change you immediately, but over time, they begin to pull you out of your old orbit. A relationship, an experience, an event. At first, nothing seems different. But then, little by little, you begin to change. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you see the world is no longer the same, not because of a sudden explosion, but because an invisible force has been shaping you over time. Jung once said the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Encounters are not just moments. They are processes, and like galaxies, you do not collide to destroy. You restructure. Parts of you may stretch, shift, move into new positions. New parts may form from that very pressure, but that does not mean you are losing yourself. It means you are becoming someone new. And perhaps what makes these collisions difficult is that they do not happen quickly. They unfold quietly, and sometimes you only realize after everything has already changed. But from the perspective of the universe, this is completely natural. No rushing, no forcing, only interaction. And within that interaction, both sides are transformed. So you do not need to fear the collisions in your life. You do not need to avoid change. You do not need to keep everything intact, because transformation is not a sign of loss. It is a sign of life. And as you begin to see this, something soft happens. You no longer need to control everything. You no longer need to keep things the same. You can simply drift with these slow movements, like galaxies colliding, not to destroy, but to create something new. And from that space, another awareness begins to emerge, that not everything in the universe can be clearly seen. There are things that do not appear directly, yet shape all movement quietly and profoundly, as if there is an invisible force holding everything together in a way that is very gentle and deeply mysterious. Here is your complete English translation, preserving the tone structure and meditative flow exactly as requested. Unique forms as you continue drifting through the slow collisions of galaxies, where everything changes not through explosions, but through invisible forces stretched across time. You begin to notice that something even more subtle presents not only what is happening, but how you are seeing it. Because the same galaxy, when the perspective shifts, its form shifts as well. A galaxy may appear like a perfect wheel when you look directly at its plain, concentric rings of light, slowly rotating in space like an orderly structure, almost peaceful. But when you change your perspective, it is no longer a wheel. It becomes a thin line, a needle of light, stretched, delicate, almost disappearing if you do not look closely enough. And if you tilt just a little more, it may resemble a cigar, not because the galaxy has changed, but because the way you see has changed. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." What you see is not only what is out there, it is also how you are seeing. In the universe, there are ring galaxies, appearing as perfect circles of light, with emptiness at the center, as if something is missing, or perhaps was never there. There are elongated galaxies, so thin they almost have no width, just a faint streak of light cutting through the darkness. There are galaxies with no clear shape, as if they exist between states or are becoming something else. But all of these forms depend on perspective. And as you begin to feel this, something deep touches within you. Because if reality can change simply by changing the way you see it, then how many things in your life are the same? There may be experiences that you have seen in only one way for a very long time, a memory, a relationship, a feeling. And from that perspective, everything seems clear, but not necessarily complete. Jung once wrote, "We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are." You do not see the world as it is. You see the world through yourself. And that is not wrong. It simply means there are other perspectives yet to open, like a galaxy that can be a wheel or a needle Depending on where you stand, an experience in your life can hold many meanings, not because it changes, but because you are changing how you see it. There are things that once felt heavy, but when seen from a distance, they become lighter. There are things that once hurt you, but when you look deeper, you begin to see their meaning, not justification, not denial, but expansion. And within that expansion, you do not need to change the past. You only need to see it in a different way. And when you do, something very gentle happens. You are no longer stuck in a single perspective. You no longer need to hold tightly to one interpretation. You begin to see that reality is more fluid than you once believed. Like galaxies that do not have a single form, you are not limited to a single way of seeing. And perhaps this is the deepest message here, that reality is not only what you see, but how you see it. And when you allow yourself to shift perspective, even just a little, you may discover something entirely new. Within what once felt familiar, very gentle, very slow, and very deep. And from that space, another question begins to emerge. If what you see is not always the whole truth, then perhaps there are things that cannot be seen, yet still exist, still influence, quietly, like invisible currents, holding galaxies together within a vast structure that we are only beginning to sense. Suspiciously perfect galaxies. As you continue drifting through the shifting forms of galaxies, where a wheel can become a line, where something that seems fixed changes with a single shift in perspective, you begin to realize that reality is not a still image. It is always moving, always unfolding, always containing more than what can be immediately seen. And then, within that space, you encounter something even stranger. Not chaos, but perfection. There are galaxies that when you look at them, you can hardly believe they exist in a universe full of collisions and distortions. Hoag's object, a nearly perfect ring, light surrounding an empty center. No clear sign of collision, no chaotic structure, just a symmetry, almost too precise. The Cartwheel Galaxy, a luminous ring, with spokes extending outward, like a vast wheel drifting in space. Too perfect, so much so that it becomes suspicious. Because in a universe where everything is constantly colliding, stretching, transforming, this kind of perfection seems out of place. It raises a question: what created it? Science does not yet have a single answer. Perhaps these structures formed from very specific collisions, occurring at precise angles, creating waves that spread evenly outward. Or perhaps they emerged from internal dynamics, subtle oscillations, reorganizing matter in ways we do not yet fully understand. Uncertain, unclear, and yet very beautiful. Carl Jung once wrote, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos in all. Disorder a secret order. Within chaos, there is always a hidden order." And perhaps what confuses us is not chaos itself, but when order appears where we least expect it. As you look at these suspiciously perfect galaxies, you may feel something familiar, because in your life, there are moments like this too. Moments when everything seems too aligned, too right, too okay. A period where everything seems to fit together. Work, relationships, emotions, all moving smoothly. And yet, deep inside, there may be a subtle feeling that something is not entirely explainable. Not doubt, but curiosity. Jung once said, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. The mind does not move only between right and wrong, but between meaning and non-meaning. And in those perfect moments, you may begin to wonder, what created this? Was it the result of right choices, or simply a coincidence unfolding before you? The answer may not matter, because like those galaxies, perfection does not need to be fully explained to exist. It only needs to be felt. And perhaps what makes perfection feel suspicious is that we are used to believing everything must have a clear reason. But the universe does not always work that way. It allows the unexplainable to exist. It allows perfect structures to appear within chaos. It does not require everything to be logical. And when you allow yourself to see this, something very gentle happens. You no longer need to understand everything to feel at ease. You no longer need to explain every experience to accept it. You can simply be there within a moment without needing to know why it is that way. Because there are things that do not need to be understood to be meaningful, like a perfect galaxy drifting in space without explanation. A peaceful moment in your bore. Life does not need to be analyzed to be real. And perhaps this is the deepest message here. That order is not always normal. Sometimes it is just as strange as chaos itself. And when you allow yourself not to separate them too clearly, you begin to enter another space, a space where everything can coexist, very gentle, very deep, and very still. And from that space, a new question begins to arise. If there are perfect structures we cannot yet explain, then perhaps how many things in the universe and within you are still present, yet unseen, quiet, unclear, and yet holding everything together like invisible currents woven between galaxies and through the deepest layers of the mind. Here is your complete faithful English translation, preserving every nuance, rhythm, and the gentle Jung-inspired tone for sleep. Anomalous motion. As you continue drifting within a space where order and chaos no longer seem like opposing extremes, where a galaxy can be both perfect and mysterious, you begin to sense that there are things, even deeper movements, that are not only difficult to grasp, understand, but seem wrong. Not wrong in a negative sense, but not following familiar laws. In some galaxies, scientists have discovered something very strange. Stars rotate in one direction, but gas rotates in the opposite direction. Two motions within the same system, yet not aligned. If you think about this in the usual way, it seems illogical. A system should be unified, should move in a single direction to maintain stability. But here, it is not so. Carl Jung once said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another." There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. There is no single rule that applies to everything. And in these counter-rotating galaxies, this difference is not an error, it is a trace. Because when scientists look deeper, they realize this often happens when one galaxy absorbs another. A smaller galaxy is pulled in, merged, but does not completely disappear. Its matter, gas, dust, stars retains part of its original motion, continuing to rotate in its own direction, even after becoming part of a larger system. A past that does not vanish, but continues to move. And as you listen to this, you may begin to feel something familiar. Because when you look at yourself, you are not a completely uniform system either. There are parts of you that are clear, consistent, but there are also parts that seem to move in another direction, thoughts that do not align with what you know, emotions that do not match what you should feel, reactions that arise without clear explanation, as if multiple currents exist at once. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because to accept yourself, you must accept even the parts that are not consistent. But if you look through the lens of the universe, this is not wrong. It simply means you have encountered every experience in your life, every person you have met, every memory you have lived through leaves a trace. Not all of those traces align immediately, some to retain their own motion, like gas rotating in the opposite direction. There are parts of you moving in different ways, not because you are wrong, but because you are complex. And perhaps what makes this uncomfortable is not the inner contradiction, but the belief that you must be unified, clear, consistent. But the universe does not require that. It allows different motions to coexist. It does not force everything to move in the same direction. And when you allow yourself to see this, something very gentle happens. You no longer need to fix every contradiction within you. You no longer need to remove what feels out of place. You can simply observe thoughts that differ, observe emotions that are not unified, and realize that all of them are part of you. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." You are not defined by what you have absorbed, but what you have lived through is still there, still moving, still influencing, and that does not need to change, because, like a galaxy, you do not need to be completely uniform to be whole. You can contain multiple movements, multiple directions, multiple parts, and all of them can still exist together. And perhaps this is the deepest message here, that no galaxy has never encountered, and no human has ever remained untouched by what they have lived through. But those traces do not make you wrong. They make you yourself, very gentle, very deep, and very real. And from that space, another realization begins to open, that if every galaxy carries traces of encounters, then perhaps the entire universe is formed, not from isolation, but from connection, overlapping relationships, intersecting currents, forming a vast network where each part influences the rest, very slowly and very deeply. Dark matter, the largest invisible part, as you continue, drifting through opposing motions, through traces of encounters that every galaxy carries, you begin to sense that the universe is not only what you can see. The lights, the structures, the forms, all seem to be only the surface of something deeper. And then you arrive at one of the greatest mysteries, not something loud, not an explosion, but an absence. When scientists observe galaxies, they notice something very strange. Stars at the edges move much faster than can be explained by the visible matter alone. If only what shines existed, the galaxy should have fallen apart long ago. But it does not. It remains stable, moving. This leads to a hypothesis that something else exists. Something that does not emit light, cannot be seen, yet makes up most of the mass. They call it dark matter. No one sees it, no one touches it, but its existence is inferred from the way everything else moves. Something invisible, yet holding everything together. Carl Jung once wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. What is unconscious is not only hidden, it is also the foundation. And as you listen to this, you may begin to feel something familiar. Because when you look at yourself, you are not only what you know about yourself, the thoughts you can name, the emotions you can explain, the actions you can control. That is only the luminous part. Beneath all of that, there is something larger, a part unclear, not easily reached, memories you do not recall, feelings you have not yet recognized, motivations you cannot name. And yet, they are still there, still influencing, still shaping how you live, how you feel, how you choose. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What you do not see is still in motion, like dark matter, not emitting light, yet keeping galaxies from falling apart. Your unconscious holds your being together. It does not need to be seen to be essential. And perhaps what makes us uneasy is not that invisible things exist, but that we are used to believing only what we can see. But the universe does not work that way. Most of it is invisible, and that does not make it less real. On the contrary, it allows everything else to exist. And when you allow yourself to feel this, something very gentle happens. You no longer need to understand everything about yourself, to accept yourself. You do not need to see everything, to trust that it has meaning. You can simply be there with what you understand and what you do not. Because, perhaps, those invisible parts are what hold you together. Like a galaxy, a luminous shell surrounding a vast, unseen structure. You are also a small part of something deeper, wider, more complex than what you can immediately perceive. And that does not need to make you anxious. It can help you relax, because you do not need to control everything. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to illuminate every shadow. You only need to trust that something is holding everything in its place. Very gentle, very deep, and very still. And from that space, another question begins to open. If most of the universe is invisible, if what matters most cannot be seen, then perhaps what we are seeking is not more light, but learning to rest within that darkness, very gently and with trust. Here is your complete English translation, preserving every detail, tone, and the slow, reflective rhythm inspired by Carl Jung, gravity, the sculptor of the cosmos. As you continue drifting very slowly through a space where invisible things hold everything together, where dark matter quietly supports the entire structure of the universe, you begin to sense that there is another hand, unseen, yet always present. Not a conscious hand, not an intention, but a force, gravity, a force so simple that we often forget it, a force that does not shine, does not make sound, has no clear form, yet silently sculpts the entire universe. Without it, there would be no galaxies, no stars, no you. When two galaxies move toward each other, it is gravity that begins to draw new shapes. Streams of stars are stretched, forming luminous tails, reaching far beyond their original structure. Bridges of matter form between galaxies, like delicate threads, connecting two seemingly separate entities. Structures become distorted, twisted, bent, as if space itself is softening under an unseen pressure. There is no instant destruction, only reformation. Carl Jung once wrote, "The psyche is a self-regulating system that maintains its equilibrium just as the body does, a system always seeking to rebalance." And gravity is how the universe regulates itself. It does not eliminate chaos. It works with it, shapes it, transforms it into new structures, not resisting, but guiding. When you look at galaxies with long tails, bridges of light, distorted shapes, you may see chaos. But if you stay with it long enough, you begin to see a pattern, not a rigid law, but a rhythm. And as you listen, something very gentle may begin to touch you. Because if in the universe, even collisions, distortions, are guided by an unseen force, then perhaps, in your life, there are such forces as well. Experiences you cannot control, changes you did not expect, moments when everything seems to shift. At first, it may look like chaos, but if you stay with it long enough, if you do not rush to conclude, you may begin to sense that something is shaping you, not destroying you, but restructuring. Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. What you resist does not disappear. It continues. But if you allow it, if you do not try to straighten everything immediately, you may realize that distortion is not deviation. It may be part of the process, just as gravity stretches a galaxy, creating new forms. The experiences in your life may also be stretching you beyond your old shape, not to make you lose yourself, but to expand you. And perhaps what we fear is not change itself, but that we cannot see the force behind. We do not know where it leads. We do not know if it has meaning, but the universe does not need to explain. It simply continues, and in that continuation, new forms emerge, new structures appear, new creations are formed. Galaxies are not static objects. They are living sculptures, created by an artist who never stops. And if you look at yourself, you may see the same. You are not a fixed shape. You are being sculpted by experiences, by emotions, by what you cannot control. And that does not need to worry you. It can allow you to soften, because you do not need to be perfect. You do not need the right shape. You do not need to keep everything unchanged. You can allow yourself to be shaped very slowly, very gently, and very naturally. And perhaps this is the deepest message here, that even in chaos, there is a pattern. Not a pattern you must understand, but a pattern you can feel. And when you no longer resist it, you begin to move with it. And from that space, another realization begins to open, that if unseen forces are shaping everything, if all structures are held by what cannot be seen, then perhaps the entire universe is not only matter, but a network where everything connects, everything influences, everything reflects one another, very deeply and very quietly. Our Milky Way is not gentle as you continue drifting within a space where gravity silently sculpts all forms, where chaos is not eliminated but shaped into new structures. You begin to feel that nothing in the universe is truly peaceful in the way we imagine. And then, very gently, you return to something more familiar, not a distant galaxy, but our home, the Milky Way, a soft band of light stretching across the night sky, an image humans have looked at for thousands of years and felt peace. It appears so gentle, so still, so safe. But if you look deeper, very deep, you begin to see another story. The Milky Way was not always like this. In the past, it has absorbed many smaller galaxies, smaller systems, drifting nearby, pulled in by gravity, torn apart, merged, and becoming part of a larger structure. Not once, but many times. Even now, a dwarf galaxy called Sagittarius is still being stretched, torn into streams of stars, wrapping around the Milky Way like traces of memory not yet dissolved. It has not disappeared. It is simply becoming part of something else. Carl Jung once wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. No growth without depth." And as you listen, you may begin to feel something very familiar, because where you live is not a space created in perfect peace. It is the result of collisions, of absorption, of long transformations, and that does not make it less beautiful. On the contrary, it makes it real. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because to accept, you must see even the parts that are not gentle." Perhaps in your life, you have passed through moments that were not peaceful, conflicts, loss, unexpected changes, and after all of that, you may look at yourself and feel that you are no longer whole as before. But if you look through the lens of the universe, wholeness does not mean unchanged. The Milky Way is no longer what it once was, but because of what it has lived through, it has become what it is now. And so have you. You are not a broken version of yourself. You are the result of everything you have lived through. The parts of you may come from past collisions, memories, people, experiences. They do not disappear. They become you. Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." The past does not define you, but it exists within you, and that does not need to be a burden. It can be a foundation, because like the Milky Way, carrying traces of galaxies it has absorbed, you also carry parts of what you have encountered. Not all of it is beautiful. Not all of it is easy to understand, but all of it is part of the story. And perhaps what makes us uneasy is not that we have a complex past, but that we once believed home must always be peaceful, stable, unchanging. But the universe is not like that. It does not create perfect places. It creates living ones, and that aliveness always includes chaos. So you do not need to seek a perfectly peaceful version of yourself. You do not need to erase the complex parts. You do not need to become something simple. You can simply be there with everything you carry. The light parts, the dark parts, the parts that have changed you, and realize that home is not a place without chaos, but a place where you can rest with all that you are, very gentle, very deep, and very real. And from that space, another realization begins to open, that if even our home is formed through collisions, if every large structure carries traces of the past, then perhaps the entire universe is not a still place, but a continuous process where everything arises, transforms, and continues in a cycle, very slow, very deep, and never truly stops. Here is your complete, faithful English translation, preserving every detail, and the gentle, contemplative tone in the spirit of Carl Jung, the life and death of stars. As you continue drifting within the unending flow of the universe, where everything is born from collisions, grows through transformations, and carries the traces of what has already, you begin to sense a very subtle law, yet very deep. A law, not loud, but always present. Birth and depletion. In some galaxies, there are special phases when everything seems to burst into life, vast clouds of gas are compressed, and within a short time on the cosmic scale, millions, even billions of new stars are born. Light becomes more radiant than ever. Energy fills everything. This phenomenon is called starburst, a burst of star formation. From afar, these galaxies appear brighter, more alive, as if they are at the peak of their existence. But if you look deeper, very deep, you begin to see something else. Because to create all those stars, the galaxy must use its own fuel, gas, and dust. And when that process happens too quickly, the fuel is consumed, not instantly, not in a single moment, but little by little. And then, after that brilliant phase, a silence begins to emerge. No more gas to form new stars, no more bursts of light. The galaxy becomes old, not because of time, but because it has burned too fast. Carl Jung once wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, there love is lacking. When one force dominates too strongly, balance is lost." And as you listen, you may begin to feel something very familiar. Because in human life, there are such phases too. Moments when everything happens very quickly, very intensely, very alive. You may have experienced such times. A burning passion, an intense relationship, a period when you pour all your energy into something. And in those moments, you feel radiant, but without balance. If everything happens too fast, too intensely, too continuously, you may begin to feel exhausted, not because it is wrong, but because it has consumed too much energy. Jung once said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. The brighter the light, the deeper the shadow." And that does not mean you should avoid the light. It does not mean you should not live fully. It only means everything needs rhythm, just as a galaxy cannot remain forever in a starburst state. You cannot always remain burning. You need pause, moments of rest, spaces without explosion, not because you are slowing down, but because you are renewing. And perhaps what we fear is not depletion itself, but that we do not understand. It is part of a cycle. We think we must always be stable, always productive, always bright. But the universe does not work that way. It allows radiant phases, and it also allows quiet ones, and both are necessary. So, you do not need to fear when you feel yourself slowing down. You do not need to worry when your energy is no longer the same. You do not need to force yourself to keep burning. You can simply be there within your own rhythm, a rhythm not always radiant, but sustainable. And perhaps this is the deepest message here, that sometimes the brightest moment is also when a new cycle is beginning, not an ending, but to a transition, very gentle, very deep, and very real. And from that space, another realization begins to open, that if every galaxy passes through cycles of birth and depletion, if every light has its limit, then perhaps what is truly sustainable is not brightness, but the ability to continue in another way, a quieter way, yet deeper and longer lasting. Cosmic winds. After you have quietly passed through galaxies burning with the light of creation, and slowly felt the silence as energy begins to fade, another layer of movement emerges, more subtle, yet no less powerful, within the deep darkness of the dawn universe. A movement not to create, but to carry away. In galaxies that have undergone starburst phases, when millions of stars are born in a short time. At that very moment, another force begins to form. Massive stars, after living very short lives, end in an explosion, supernova, and each explosion is not only a death, but a release. Energy, matter, and heavy elements are expelled outward with tremendous force. When millions of stars explode within a galaxy in its burning phase, these streams of matter combine, forming cosmic winds, superwinds. They are unlike any wind you have known. No sound, no clear form, yet they carry everything the galaxy has created and sweep it away into intergalactic space. Clouds of gas, elements, fragments of stars. What once was the galaxy's future now is blown away, and in that moment, something strange happens. The very process that creates life becomes the cause of weakening its continuation. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. What seems external is reflecting an inner law, because if you listen long enough, you may realize these cosmic winds do not exist only in galaxies, they also exist within you. There are phases when you create a great deal. Ideas, emotions, actions, new things constantly emerge, but sometimes that very explosion creates pressure. An invisible force begins to push things out of you. You may not notice at first, but you begin to feel that you are losing something. Energy, focus, connection. And like galaxies, you do not do this intentionally. It is a consequence of everything having happened too intensely. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Not by only looking at the light, but by understanding what is happening in the dark. The winds within you may be exhaustion, a subtle emptiness, or a silence you cannot name. And if you resist it, try to hold on to everything. Try not to let anything leave. To you will become more tired, because there are things that need to be released, just as in the universe. The elements blown out of galaxies do not disappear. They become material for other systems, other stars, other galaxies. Loss is not an ending, but a transition. And perhaps what we fear is not loss itself, but not knowing where it will go. But the universe never wastes anything. Not a single explosion, not a single wind, not a single grain of dust. Everything continues in another form. So, when you feel that a part of you is drifting away, do not rush to call it loss. See it as a wind carrying away what you no longer need and creating space for something else. Something not yet here, but already on its way. In the universe, superwinds may make a galaxy more quiet, less light, less activity, but that quiet is the condition for a new state to emerge. No more explosions, no more chaos, but more stable, deeper. And as you listen, in the quiet space of the night, you may realize you do not need to hold on to everything. You do not need to cling to every emotion. You do not need to maintain every state. You can let some things drift away gently, without resistance, without fear. Because like galaxies, you are not only what you keep, you are also what you have released. And from that release, a new space opens, wider, quieter, and more ready for what has not yet arrived. And when the final wind settles, when everything becomes still, another question begins to emerge. If matter can be blown away, if light can fade, then what truly remains? And from that question, we will gently move forward into an even deeper layer of the universe, where what cannot be seen holds the greatest part of everything. Here is your complete, precise English translation, maintaining every detail and preserving the calm, introspective tone inspired by Carl Jung. A heart that consumes supermassive black holes as the cosmic winds begin to settle, as matter has been blown away, as light no longer burns as it once did. A deeper stillness begins to emerge. But it is not complete emptiness. At the center of that silence, there is always a point, a place toward which everything seems to move, a center, a pull, a heart that does not shine. At the center of most galaxies, there exists something we cannot see directly, yet we know it is there because of the way everything around it moves. A supermassive black hole. Supermassive black hole. It does not emit light. It does not reflect light. It does not allow anything, even light, to escape once it crosses an invisible boundary, the event horizon. And then, a quiet paradox appears. The darkest thing can become the most powerful source of energy, because when matter is pulled close to a black hole, it does not fall in immediately. It spirals. It heats up. It shines, forming an accretion disk, brighter than billions of stars. A dark center, yet creating the brightest light. Carl Jung once wrote, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos in all disorder, a secret order. Within all chaos, there is always a hidden order." If you listen to this very slowly, you may begin to feel that the image of a black hole is not entirely unfamiliar, because within every human being there are such centers. Points, unclear, hard to name, yet influencing everything. Deep fears, untouched memories, emotions you avoid. You may not look at them, but they are still there. And sometimes they pull you, not in an obvious way, but gently, deeply, like gravity. Jung called this the unconscious. And he said the unconscious is not just the evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. The dark is not only where fear resides, it is also where unrealized potential lives. Like a black hole, it does not only consume, it also redistributes energy. Jets can be launched from its poles, stretching thousands of light years, affecting the entire galaxy. A small point, yet capable of shaping an entire vast system. And perhaps this reflects a very deep truth, that you do not need to be large to have influence. Just a small belief, a memory, an emotion. If it is deep enough, it can shape the entire way you see the world. But what is interesting is, just as astronomers cannot directly see black holes, we also cannot directly see our unconscious centers. We can only recognize them through what they affect, through how you react, through recurring emotions, through choices that feel natural. And as you begin to notice this, a very gentle shift occurs. You no longer try to control everything on the port surface. You begin to listen more deeply, not to fix, but to understand. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." To look outward is to dream. To look inward is to awaken. But looking inward is not a forceful act. It is a softening, an allowing yourself to be closer to what you once avoided. And when you do, you may realize that the black holes within you are not only places of loss, they are also sources of energy, sources of transformation, sources of change, because the deepest place is often where something new begins. In the universe, black holes can regulate star formation. They can heat or cool gas. They can stabilize a galaxy or push it into chaos. A small point, yet decisive. And perhaps within you, there is such a point. Not outside, not in what others see, but very deep, very quiet, very real. And when you remain long enough in that quiet, without trying to understand immediately, without trying to change, just simply being there, you may begin to feel that everything you experience, every emotion, every memory, is orbiting a center. And that center is not something to fear, but something to listen to, because in the deepest silence, you may not find answers immediately, but you will find a kind of stability, a sense of being held, like a galaxy that continues to exist because of an invisible center. And as you slowly relax into that feeling, another door begins to open. That if a single point can influence an entire system, then what might the connections between systems create? And from there, we continue, drifting into a deeper layer, where galaxies no longer stand alone, but begin to connect within a vast network beyond our imagination. What is hidden? After you have quietly passed through the centers of galaxies, where a small, invisible point can hold an entire structure together, you begin to realize something even more subtle, that even when you look at a galaxy, you are not truly seeing it. Because light does not always tell the truth. When you look up at the night sky, you see soft bands of light, gentle spirals, structures that seem calm, almost still. A spiral galaxy may appear like a peaceful work of art, but that is only what visible light allows you to see. Hidden deep within is an entirely different world. Dense clouds of cosmic dust, obscure central regions, compressed gas clouds, where millions of stars are forming in silent explosions, high-energy regions, where matter is torn apart and radiation is emitted at wavelengths the human eye cannot perceive. If you look only with your eyes, you would think everything is quiet. But if you shift to infrared, you will see heat. Shift to X-rays, you will see violence. The same galaxy, yet completely different, depending on how you look. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. What we see is often only the surface, and what we do not see is what needs to be understood." This is not only true for the universe, it is also true for human beings. You may look at someone and see calmness, stability, even happiness, but that is only visible light. Hidden deep inside may be unspoken thoughts, suppressed emotions, silent conflicts, like cosmic dust, obscuring the brightest regions. The human mind also has such layers. Beliefs formed long ago, unprocessed experiences, memories no longer clear, yet still influencing. Jung called this the shadow, and he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, not by looking only at the light, but by seeing the darkness. But seeing here is not forcing, not digging aggressively. It is allowing yourself to recognize that what you see is not the whole. And as you begin to accept that, something very gentle happens. You become softer, less judgmental, less certain, but also deeper, because you understand that every person is like a galaxy. There are parts that shine, parts that are hidden, and parts that can only be seen when you change the way you look. In science, to understand a galaxy, We do not use just one kind of light. We use many wavelengths, many tools, many approaches. And perhaps, to understand yourself, you also need more than one way of seeing, not only thinking, but also feeling, not only logic, but also intuition, not only what you know, but also what you feel, yet cannot name. And when you allow all of that to coexist, without trying to remove, without trying to hide, a wholeness begins to form. Jung called this process individuation, becoming yourself, not by perfection, but by accepting all parts, the light and the shadow, like a galaxy that cannot exist with only what shines. It needs what is hidden, and perhaps what makes us uneasy is not that there are dark parts, but that we have not yet learned how to see them. But you do not need to rush. You do not need to understand everything right now. You can simply recognize that there is more than what you are seeing, and that does not make the world more frightening. On the contrary, it makes the world deeper, like when you look at a galaxy and know that, behind its calm appearance, millions of processes are unfolding. You are no longer just seeing, you begin to feel. And in that state, a very special quiet appears. Not because everything has become simple, but because you no longer need it to be simple. You accept complexity, hiddenness, incompleteness, and in that acceptance, you begin to feel more at ease, as if drifting in a vast space where you do not need to see everything, to trust that it has meaning. And from that stillness, another question gently emerges. If what is hidden is an essential part of reality, then how deep might the mysteries we have yet to discover be? And from there, we continue, drifting even more softly into the unknown, where the universe and the human mind are still quietly holding what has not yet been named. Here is your complete faithful English translation, preserving every detail and maintaining the gentle, introspective tone inspired by Carl Jung. The early universe, stranger than the present. As you begin to grow familiar with the idea that what is hidden is what makes up most of reality, that every galaxy, every human being, carries within it layers that cannot be immediately seen, another door begins to open, softly, but far more vast. A question, very distant, very deep. How did everything begin? If you rewind time, not years, not centuries, but billions of years, you will see that the universe was not like it is now. There were no balanced spiral galaxies, no stable structures, no order as we are used to seeing. Instead, there was a world of chaos. The first galaxies had no clear shape. They were distorted. They collided. They flared violently, like sparks in an endless darkness. And what is strange is, according to recent observations, especially from the James Webb Telescope, these galaxies appeared earlier and evolved faster than we once thought, as if the universe did not slowly mature, but erupted from its very first steps. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. There is no awakening without passing through chaos." And as you listen to this, you may begin to realize that the image of the early universe is not only a physical story, it is a symbol, because if you look within yourself, you also did not begin in stability, not in clarity, not in a complete form. You began with emotions not yet understood, experiences not yet named, fragmented thoughts, an inner universe, once just as chaotic. The early years of your life, faint memories, intense feelings. you could not explain, all formed a state of instability. And yet, from that, everything began to take shape. Beliefs, responses, psychological structures. Like early galaxies, though chaotic, they carried within them immense creative energy. Jung once said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos in all. Disorder, a secret order. Within all chaos, there is always a hidden order. But that order does not always appear immediately. It needs time. And perhaps what makes us uneasy is not that life is chaotic, but that we expect it to become clear too soon. We want things to be stable. We want to understand ourselves immediately. We want clear answers. But the universe does not function that way. It is not simple in its early stages. It is complex, rapid, full of change. And that very complexity is what allows later structures to form. If the universe had begun neatly, perhaps there would not be enough diversity to create the galaxies we see today. And if you had begun perfectly, perhaps you would not have enough depth to become yourself. So, the chaotic parts within you are not wrong. They are a phase of becoming. And just as scientists are gradually understanding the early universe, you too can gradually understand yourself. There is no need to rush, no need to force. Simply observe, listen, stay, because within that chaos, there are signals, clues, directions. And if you remain long enough, something very gentle happens. You begin to see connections. What once seemed fragmented begins to link. What once felt unclear becomes more defined, not instantly, but gradually, like the universe, which after billions of years from chaos became a vast structure filled with order. And perhaps what matters most is not what you have become, but that you are becoming. A process, not a destination. And when you allow yourself to remain in that process, without resistance, without urgency, a very deep peace begins to emerge. Not because everything is clear, but because you no longer need it to be clear right away. You trust that order is forming, and from that trust, another door opens. If the universe was once chaotic and gradually became structured, then those structures, will they continue to change? Is there a larger network connecting everything beyond individual galaxies? And from that question, we continue to drift more gently into a deeper layer of the universe, where nothing stands alone but begins to connect within a vast structure, is silent and full of mystery. Space also bends what we see. As you quietly move beyond the early galaxies, where everything began in chaos and slowly crystallized into ordered structures, you might think, at least now, what you see is real. But then, something else appears, more subtle, more delicate, and also harder to grasp. That is, even light does not travel in a straight line. In the universe, space-time is not a flat stage. It can bend, stretch, distort under the influence of mass. And when light passes through these curved regions, it no longer travels straight. It bends, it stretches, it duplicates. This phenomenon is called gravitational lensing. A distant galaxy, when its light passes through another galaxy cluster, may appear to us as a ring, a curve, or even multiple copies of itself. Not because it is truly like that, but because the path of light has changed. Carl Jung once wrote, "We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. We do not see things as they truly are, but as we are. And as you listen, you may feel a quiet familiarity, because not only the universe, but the human mind is also a lens. What you see does not depend only on the outside world, but also on what exists within you. Memories, beliefs, experiences, all of them bend the way you see the world. Two people can look at the same event, yet feel completely different. Not because the event changes, but because their inner space is different. Like light, passing through different regions of space-time, creating different images. And perhaps this explains why sometimes you feel you have misunderstood something, not because you are wrong, but because you are seeing through a lens shaped by the past, by what you have lived, by what you have believed. Jung called this projection, and he said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. What you see in others sometimes is not entirely them, but how you see them, like a galaxy stretched into a ring of light, not because it is a ring, but because its light has traveled a curved path. This does not make reality unreal. It simply reminds you that reality is more complex than what you see at first. And when you begin to realize that, a gentle shift happens. You no longer rush to conclusions. You no longer feel absolute certainty. You become softer, more open to the possibility that there may be another perspective, another wavelength, another way of seeing. And in that openness, a quiet peace appears, because you no longer need to grasp everything, no longer need to know exactly what things are. You only need to allow yourself to be within the act of seeing, to observe, to feel, and to realize that what you see is only a part. Like astronomers, when they see distorted images, they do not stop there. They ask, where did the light pass? How was space-time bent? What is hidden behind this image? And perhaps you can do the same with your own experience, not only asking, what is happening, but also, what am I seeing through? A very gentle question that can open an entirely new depth, because when you begin to recognize your lens, you are no longer confined by it. You can shift, change perspective, expand awareness, and in that space, reality becomes wider, softer, deeper, like the universe, where a distorted image is not an error, but a doorway to what lies beyond. And as you drift within that feeling, without trying to grasp, without trying to define, simply being there, another question gently arises. If reality can be bent, if what we see always travels a path, then perhaps there are larger structures shaping the entire universe in ways we are only beginning to perceive. And from there, we continue to drift even more gently into deeper networks, where everything is not only bent, but connected within a vast, its structure far beyond any single image. Here is your complete, precise English translation, maintaining every detail, and the calm Jung-inspired tone for a reflective, sleep-ready experience. Exceptions that shake science. As you move through layers of bent light, as you begin to realize that what you see always carries traces of the journey it has taken, a very subtle feeling begins to emerge, that perhaps not everything follows the rules. In science, we often search for stable laws, predictable models, structures that can be explained, and for a long time, astronomers believed that galaxies must contain a certain proportion of dark matter, a universal formula that keeps everything working. But then, some galaxies did not follow that. There are galaxies that seem to lack dark matter. They are lighter, more empty than theory predicts. And there are others that contain far more dark matter than expected, as if they are not reading the same script as the rest of the universe. These exceptions are not mistakes. They are signs that there is something we do not yet fully understand. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble." The greatest problems of life are not meant to be completely solved, but to be lived with. And as you listen to this, you may begin to realize that the exceptions in the universe are not so different from the exceptions within you. The parts that do not fit, that do not match expectations, that do not follow the norm, thoughts you cannot explain, emotions that seem irrational, reactions that make you wonder, why am I like this? We often try to eliminate these things, to fix them, to adjust them, so that we can become normal, so that we can fit a model. But perhaps, just like in science, exceptions are not errors. They are doors to things we have not yet understood, not yet explored, not yet accepted. Jung once said, "Individuation does not shut one out from the world, but gathers the world to oneself." To become yourself is not to eliminate what is different, but to gather everything in, including the parts that are not logical. And when you begin to see those exceptions, not as problems, but as messages, a very gentle shift happens. You no longer resist them. You begin to listen, because perhaps those mismatched parts are carrying something new, another perspective, another possibility, another way of being. In science, exceptions have shaken entire understandings. They force people to ask again, to expand theories, to accept that reality is larger than they once thought. And perhaps within you, there are such exceptions as well. Things that do not fit your self-image, feelings that do not align with reason, desires you have not yet dared to name. They may confuse you, even make you uncomfortable. But if you stay with them just a little, without judgment, without rushing, you may begin to see something opening, not a clear answer, but a direction, a feeling that you do not need to be perfect, to be whole. Because wholeness does not come from everything fitting, but from allowing all parts to coexist, like the universe, which is not made only of laws, but also of exceptions, irregularities, differences, unpredictable things. And from these, richness, diversity, and creativity are born. So, perhaps you do not need to fix everything. Perhaps some parts of you do not need to become correct. They only need to be seen, to be heard, to be accepted. And when you do that, a very deep relief begins to spread, not because everything is explained, but because you no longer need to explain everything. You simply remain there with all that you are. And in that space, another question gently arises. If exceptions are where knowledge grows, if what does not fit opens new possibilities, then perhaps the entire universe is also continuously becoming in ways we are only beginning to understand. And from there, we continue to drift even more gently into the final depth where everything no longer needs to be explained, but only it felt in the very deep stillness of the entire universe. Dead galaxies. After moving through the exceptions, the mismatched points that shake our understanding of the universe, you may begin to feel that nothing is fixed anymore. Laws are no longer absolute. And then, in that vast space, another image slowly appears, slower, quieter, almost motionless. Galaxies that are no longer alive as before. They no longer create new stars. No more regions of compressed hot gas. No more brilliant bursts of light. Only red light remains. The light of old stars. Stars that have nearly exhausted their fuel. Slow, dim, stable. These galaxies are sometimes called dead galaxies, but in truth, they are not dead. They still exist, still hold their structure, still drift through space for billions of years. No longer radiant, but not gone. Carl Jung once wrote, "What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. What we call an ending is often also a beginning." And as you listen, you may begin to realize that these dead galaxies are not unfamiliar at all, because in life there are such phases too, moments when you are no longer burning as before, no longer full of energy, no longer creating something new. Everything becomes slower, quieter, even somewhat empty. And sometimes you may call that the end of a phase, a relationship, a version of yourself. But like those galaxies, it is not disappearance. It is another state, a state with less movement, less noise, but more stable. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Becoming yourself is not a sudden burst, but a long process. And within that process, there are phases that no longer grow in the way you expect. No expansion, no rapid change, no clarity. But that does not mean you have stopped. You are simply in another rhythm, a slower rhythm, a deeper one, less visible, like the red light of aging stars, no longer brilliant, but steady, enduring. And perhaps what we fear is not the ending, but the silence that comes with it. When there is no movement, no sign of progress, when everything becomes still. But if you stay within that stillness, just a little, without rushing away, you may begin to feel something very different. A peace, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing needs to change right now. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to create something new. You only need to be there, to be present, to breathe, to exist. And in that state, a deep understanding begins to emerge, that your value does not come from what you create, but from your existence. Like those galaxies, no longer forming stars, yet still part of the universe, still contributing to the whole. And perhaps this brings a quiet relief, that you do not need to always be bright, not always growing, not always moving forward. You can have phases of simply being, nothing more, nothing less. And that does not diminish your value. It makes you more real, deeper. And when you allow yourself to remain in that state, without resistance, without urgency, something very subtle happens. You begin to regenerate, not loudly, not through big leaps, but slowly, gently, almost unnoticed, like the universe, where even as some galaxies grow quiet, elsewhere, new stars are still being born. Life does not stop. It simply changes form, and as you drift within that feeling, no longer fearing endings, no longer clinging to what has passed, another door opens. If endings are not disappearance, if everything simply shifts from one state to another, then perhaps the entire universe is also moving in a rhythm, slow, deep, and never truly stopping. And from there, we gently step into the final part, where all movement, all light, all beginnings and endings merge into one, within a stillness, vast and gentle. Here is your complete, precise English translation, preserving every detail, rhythm, and the gentle Jung-inspired tone for deep relaxation before sleep. Galaxies are the universe's diary. As you move through, galaxies that are slowly quieting, structures that no longer blaze yet still quietly exist, you may begin to feel something deeper, that the universe is not merely a collection of objects, it is a story. Every galaxy you see is not just a shape, not just light, not just scattered points in the darkness. It is a record, a page of a diary, written in light, in motion, in time. The spiral arms are traces of rotating matter, distorted structures are memories of collisions. Bright regions are places where life once burst into being, and the dark regions are also part of the story. Carl Jung once wrote, "The psyche is a self-regulating system that maintains its equilibrium just as the body does." The human mind is also like a living system, always recording, always adjusting, always balancing. And as you listen to this, you may begin to realize that you too carry within you a diary, not written on paper, not written in words, but in experience. What you have lived through does not disappear. It becomes how you see, how you feel, how you respond, like a galaxy that cannot be separated from its history. You too cannot be separated from what has shaped you. But what is interesting is the strange galaxies, those that do not follow familiar forms, are the ones that help us understand the most, because they force us to question, to look again, to expand our understanding. And perhaps within you, there are such strange parts as well, things you cannot explain, emotions unlike anyone else's, thoughts you once tried to hide. You may have believed that these things were wrong, needed to be fixed, but if you look at them in another way, they may be clues leading you to a deeper part of yourself. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. To become yourself is not to remove the strange parts, but to understand them, because those very parts contain what you have not yet discovered." Like in the universe, strange galaxies are not meaningless anomalies. They are keys to understanding deeper laws, larger structures, connections we could not see before. And when you begin to see things this way, a very gentle shift happens. You no longer fear differences. You no longer avoid the unclear parts. You begin to feel curious, gently, without pressure, without judgment, simply wanting to understand. And in that curiosity, a soft feeling begins to spread, as if you are reading a book where each page reveals something new. You do not need to know the ending. You do not need to understand immediately. You only need to keep reading, to keep feeling, to keep staying, because the universe does not tell its story in a hurry. It tells very slowly, across billions of years, through countless forms, through the strangest things. And you are the same. You do not need to understand your whole story right now. You do not need to decode everything. You only need to allow yourself to be part of that story. A chapter, a passage, a small movement within a very long journey. And as you drift within that feeling, no longer trying to control, no longer trying to define, a very deep stillness begins to appear. Not an ending, but an opening, that everything you see, everything you feel, every part you once thought was strange, one is prime. Lines of writing in your own diary, and as you read it, without judgment, without rushing, you begin to see something very simple, that everything has meaning. And from that realization, we gently move into the final part, where there are no more questions, no more searching, only a very quiet presence within the whole story of the universe and of yourself drifting into space. And as you have moved through the entire journey, from strange galaxies, slow collisions, light born from darkness, to structures carrying billions of years of memory, perhaps now you are no longer looking at the universe. You are feeling it. The images that were once clear begin to soften, no longer sharp, no longer needing to be understood. The galaxies that once spun now seem to dissolve into distant streams of light, so far away that they are no longer objects, but become a feeling that is very light, very vast, very still. Carl Jung once wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos in all disorder, a secret order." And perhaps you have just experienced that. From the strange, from the unpredictable, from movements that seemed meaningless, something very deep has quietly revealed itself, not in words, not in logic, but in feeling, a quiet understanding that everything is exactly where it needs to be. And now, you do not need to go any further. No need to explore more. No need to find answers. You can return, not to a place, but to yourself. Your breath is still there, slow, gentle, steady. You can feel it, moving in and out. No need to adjust, no need to control, only to notice. That throughout this entire journey, no matter how far you traveled, you never left this moment. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." And perhaps that is what is happening now. No more galaxies, no more vast structures, no more mysteries to solve. Only a wide, quiet space within you, a space with no pressure, no urgency, no demands. You do not need to become anyone. You do not need to achieve anything. You only need to be here. And in that being, something very natural happens. Your body begins to relax even more. Your shoulders soften. Your breath slows. Your thoughts, if they remain, become distant, like the galaxies you passed, still there, but no longer touching you. You do not need to push them away. You do not need to stop them. Just let them drift, like light, moving through space, unhurried, without goal. And as you let everything drift, a familiar feeling returns. The feeling of safety, the feeling of not needing to do anything anymore, only rest. Carl Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect but by the play instinct." And sleep is the same. It does not come when you try. It comes when you allow your body to rest, allow your mind to settle, allow yourself to not continue anymore. You have gone far enough. You have seen enough. Now, you can simply ease in this quiet space, a quietness, not empty, but full of presence, full of gentleness, full of something hard to name. Perhaps it is peace. And as you rest in that feeling, without doing anything more, without thinking anything more, sleep will come very gently, very naturally, like a galaxy quietly drifting through endless space. No beginning, no end, only a very soft movement. And tonight, you can drift just like that. No effort, no control, only close your eyes and let everything fade away, like distant galaxies, growing dim, far away, and you, here, in a space, very still, very deep, and very safe. If you'd like, I can now compile all translated sections into one seamless audiobook-style script for your Stories for Sleep channel, with pacing cues and voice guidance.